and you're listening to the Fenzi Dog Sports Podcast, brought to you by the Fenzi Dog Sports Academy, an online school dedicated to providing high-quality instruction for competitive dog sports, using only the most current and progressive training methods. Today, I'll be talking to Michele Ellertson about being intentional and about skill building for your Nosework training. Hi, Michele. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited.
I'm excited to chat. To start us out, do you want to just share a little bit kind of about your dogs, who you have, what you're working on with them?
Yeah. I have currently two Belgian Taverns, working line Belgian Taverns, Cannoli and Praline. And Cannoli is, oh gosh, it's so sad for me to even say it, but she's going to be 6 this year. Where does the time go? It goes too fast. But we are finishing out our elite championship in NACSW Nosework. She has taken me on quite a ride and has taught me so much about the drive in this sport, about arousal in this sport, about, how sometimes we push our really talented dogs just a little bit faster or a little bit harder, maybe is not the right word, but along those lines, than a more sensitive dog. And boy, has she really changed my mind in how I lay out information for all dogs, not regardless of their drive or their commitment or their work ethic, in more of a like step-by-step slower pace than what I did for her. It's one of those things where I went down a very fast path with her because she was very talented, very young, and realized maybe 2 years ago that that was probably a mistake, and had to step back and had to rebuild and had to reteach some things that we had glossed over in the beginning. So she's been a real fun partner to have in that journey, and it's really changed the way I teach now. And then there's Praline, who we also do. She also does Mondio ring, which is a protection sport in obedience, jumps, and protection. And that's that's my hobby. I do that. That is my hobby, and Nosework is my profession. But the Mondio ring is my hobby, and I love it. She is so fun to do it with. I've embraced the positive training aspect in that world and have really enjoyed the process with her. And then there's Praline, who is, she'll be 2 this year. She is a journey all of her own. She is a sensitive soul. She has some big feelings about pretty much everything. She has the only thing she doesn't have big feelings about are other dogs, which go figure. But she has big feelings about people. She has big feelings about new spaces. She has big feelings about vehicles, about things that might eat baby Belgians, she just has big feelings. So we've been taking things really slow, almost painfully slow, to help her grow into her maturity as she grows up. And, lessons abound with that dog. She has changed so much of what I see in dogs also. They're just the best. They're the best lessons. They're the best teachers if we're willing to listen.
How did you originally actually get into dog sports and, kind of Nosework in particular?
I was a pet trainer after my corporate life. After I decided that my corporate life was not for me, I started pursuing training dogs, and I was a pet trainer at a fabulous local school. And the owner saw an article written in Whole Dog Journal about this sport called canine nosework that was coming up, and she wanted to bring it into the school, but she did not want to learn something new. So she, wrangled the young whippersnapper and who was eager for all of the things. And I started learning about it. I went to take classes with Jill Marie O'Brien and Amy Hero and Ron Gaunt. I was fortunate enough to start my career with them and a small group of dog training enthusiasts, which is all we were at that time. There weren't really trials to speak of. There wasn't really a reason why we were doing this, aside from the love and the joy that it brought to the dogs who were participating in it. And it's been cool to watch the evolution of, I work for the NACSW, so that's my world. It's been cool to watch the evolution of the NACSW and how big it's gotten and how popular the game has gotten. And also, there's a small part of me that feels just a little reminiscent of why we did this in the first place. And, have we lost sight of the benefit that this game brings to the dog's life, regardless of if you ever get a title or a ribbon or anything? I mean, those are all great, and I do that too. And, that definitely quote proves what I'm doing. But man, watching a dog come out of its shell because for the first 5 weeks, it couldn't eat a cookie in the building. And then all of a sudden it starts, exploring on its own. And in a couple of months, it's doing things that the owners never believed possible. Like that's, for me, that's the spirit of this game. And I like to remind myself of that when I get into like the competitive trial-y kind of mindset for myself. I like to reflect on like, wow, I truly believe that every single dog in every single home should get to play some kind of Nosework game, even if it's just searching for meatballs in your living room. I just, it's so enriching for them. But that's how I got kind of roped into it. And then, one thing leads to another, and you get kind of bitten by the sport bug, and you want to experience the things. And I've had bunches of dogs who were super driven and wanted to do stuff, and I needed a way to tire them out. So I got into competitive obedience, and then that led me down. I had shepherds at the time, and the shepherd path led me down to like IGP, which is another protection sport. And then that path led me down to my Belgian shepherds and Mondio ring. And now I'm just, it's my life. I'm all in.
Knowing that that's kind of how you got into Nosework, do you have a philosophy or an approach or something that you feel like kind of runs through your training? If so, how do you describe it?
I guess the approach and philosophy, because they're, essentially the same thing, is I am so much more willing to listen to the dog and go at the dog's pace these days. There was a point where I got incredibly competition driven and wanted to get people out competing as fast as possible. And dogs are brilliant, and they'll let you do those things, and they'll let you push them, and they'll let you, most dogs will come along seemingly fine. And then somewhere along the line, usually not until we got to elite or somewhere later in their journey, they kind of broke. I mean, I broke is an extreme way to put it, but the drive disappeared, the joy, just the enjoyment that the dog had in the activity started to diminish a little bit. And my response and the handler's responses were to solve the problem or push it harder. The trainer I am today is much more inclined to play more, train less. The trainer I am today is much more willing to listen to the whispers that the dogs are giving in the moment, so that I don't get to the shouts. I don't want to see the shouts. I don't want to see the dog disengaging from the search or getting caught in, what we call mischief odors or something like that. I want deliberate, confident, happy hunting. And the minute I see something that's a little bit off, I rewind and start to think about, okay, somewhere along the line, I lost the dog a little bit, and where is that? But I'm much quicker to pick that up now. I make adjustments that take care of the dog's attitude And for me, the attitude is above everything. If that dog feels great and I get one rep of the thing that I was looking to train that day, that's fine. The dog feels good about it.
Yeah. I think when people start nose work, kind of at first, they're often very focused on that final piece, right? That final alert. But I know the kind of part of what you talk about is that the search really starts long before that. So, what story is our dog telling us kind of as they search, and how can we learn to, listen to that story more kind of along with what you're describing as your philosophy?
Yeah, there's a huge focus on the final alert, and I call it the final chapter. There's so much more that happens to it in that along that line that the dog is talking about way before the decision is made. And along that line, we have the recognition moment, that first moment the dog realizes that odor is in the space and therefore productivity is available for him. And from that recognition moment, he goes into investigation. And through that investigation, he's asking questions of the odor, of the environment. Is it getting stronger or weaker here? Is it getting stronger or weaker there? And through those questions, small statements start to be made as well. Oh, it is stronger here. It's going away here. It's coming closer here. And they start to make movement choices based on those statements. Again, I go back to the attitude of the dog, because the attitude between the dog asking a question of odor and making a statement about what odor is doing is different. The body language looks different. It's more deliberate if it's a statement. It's more direct if it's a statement. And those go back and forth throughout the course of the dog's work. So multiple questions and then a statement. And then maybe the dog asks a couple more and then a statement. And I'm not talking about questions where it's involving the handler at all. This is just between the dog and odor. Generally speaking, in this game, there are two relationships at play. One is between the dog and the handler, and the other is between the dog and odor. And I think that we need to take care to keep the dog-odor relationship really primary in between those two. The handler relationship needs to be secondary, because really the only time I want to be involved is at that kind of demand to be paid moment where the dog has done all the work. That doesn't mean I don't have a role until that point. But it's the only point that I really want the dog to be looking at me or for me in the series, in the discovery sequence, right? Recognition, investigation, decision, communication. I just want that involvement at the very last moment. But it doesn't mean that I don't have a role. If I am good at hearing the behavior changes, the direction changes, the speed changes, the breathing changes, the stutter steps, the bobbles, those moments where the dog is going straight and then it looks like their rear end and their front end want to go in different directions, that's communication for us. We should be noticing those things and understanding that that's a multiple odor cone situation, like at least two. What else can I observe that might tell me that there are more? But those things happen all the way from the very moment the dog sets foot in the search area.
So if we're starting with that early moment, right? That earliest moment of recognition, I think you called it. So what are some of the, early subtle little changes in a dog's behavior that might tell you, yeah, they're beginning to interact with odor. They've noticed that opportunity.
They're very similar to prey sequence kind of things. So if you think about the natural prey sequence in the dog and the way the dog might hunt, like I know my dog visually hunts for rabbits in my yard all the time because the rabbits are stupid and they like to hang out in my yard and then risk a limb as they run as fast as possible trying to find a hole in the fence. But I can tell when she's visually hunting because of the stance of her body, the way she's holding her tail. In Nosework, it's not a visual hunt, it's an olfactory hunt. But when the dog comes in deliberate to find target odor, and they encounter the first tendril of odor, we see often the easiest one to see is a direction change. And depending on the dog, it's usually pretty demonstrative and fairly hard to miss if you're looking for it. It's where the dog is moving straight and then reverses his direction or turns sharply to the left or sharply to the right. Those movements are not natural. That's not a way that a dog, if your dog is just sniffing around the yard and kind of putzing around, they don't move like that. If it's influenced by something, you better believe they're going to make a change, especially if they value that something that has caught their interest. So direction change is a big one. Speed is one that people point out a lot. And this can be either speeding up in the movement, faster direction changes, faster movements forward. My dog goes back and forth like a shark quite a lot, where she's kind of moving through. And I almost envision it as she's in that cone, and through her journey in that cone, she's making decisions about like hot or cold, hot or cold, hot or cold, hot or cold. And she's changing her direction every time she takes in a little bit of information. But speed can also be slowing down. If you have a more methodical dog who appreciates the calculus that it takes to solve a problem, they might take more care in collecting the data that they're looking for, as opposed to, my crazy dogs who just want to move as fast as they possibly can and get the thing done as fast as they possibly can. Fast flashy is a thing, but it is hard, man, because you have to be incredibly on to notice all the little things. Give me a slow, steady dog any day of the week. I always say it, my next dog, man, I'm going to put bricks on their feet or something.
That's funny. Thinking about, handler skill kind of as we go, what are some of the things that an experienced handler knows to look for, notices, or, learns to kind of watch that a more novice handler, maybe it's their first Nosework dog, they might miss that when they're watching their dog search.
Yeah,
I think they're looking at.
Yeah, I think that the biggest difference between someone who's an experienced handler, and by experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've worked the most dogs or that they've owned the most dogs or that they're on their 11th Nosework dog or whatever the case may be. It's more that they've clocked watch time on the way that dogs move, and mindful watch time, not just kind of blindly sitting there waiting for the dog to find the thing so the handler can pay, but really watching. I always encourage people to go volunteer at trials, because this is the best way to log that watch time. And when you're sitting there acting as steward or acting as cold box setter or whatever job it is that you've gotten assigned to, push yourself to notice, when does the dog recognize odor? When is it investigating? When is it asking questions? When is it making statements? And through that kind of deliberate observation, we learn a lot. And taking that one step further, being willing to almost be wrong. Like, oh, I think that's investigation. Oh no, that was something else. That was critter smell. That was, and through being wrong, we learn a lot about what made us think that was investigation of odor in the first place, and why did we make our decision that it was dog smell or critter smell or whatever the case may be. Experienced handlers can see this stuff faster. It's not that novice handlers can't see it. It's that the processing time that somebody needs who has not logged the mindful watch time is just longer. So it's harder to see in the moment. I do video reviews all the time and trial reviews and everything for people. And I feel like even for green handlers, it's fairly easy for them to see it when it's slowed down or when it's in a video that we can replay a couple times, or when I'm pointing it out, even something as simple as that. Through experience, we gain the ability to see it in real time. And if we see it in real time, we can make handling decisions more mindfully in relation to what the dog is saying and not just in relation to how we are interpreting our environment.
So often in Nosework, the focus is on the hide, where to put it, how fast the dog can find it, those kind of things. But you often recommend thinking instead about what we want the dog to learn during the search. So can you talk about what that means to you and kind of why it's important from your perspective?
Yeah, I started noticing that when students were practicing, there was a tendency to, how do I want to say it? Like, just put out hides, like just not really giving thought to what their dog needed that day or that week or leading up to a trial or whatever the case may be, but instead looking at the environment and letting the environment dictate their hide placement. This might be cool. That might be cool. I don't know what that's going to do. Oh, wouldn't it be cool if my dog found a hide in the deer statue's nose? I don't know, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And while that stuff is fun, and I don't mean at all to say that we shouldn't be doing the fun things, because it's fun. Why not?
Yeah.
Put a hide in the deer's nose. Go for it. But I don't know. I'm not convinced that if that's all you're doing, you're building the dog's skill set. You're giving them pictures. You're maybe introducing an idea of something untraditional or weird can happen with odor. And as long as odor's there, it's yours. Maybe that's a takeaway from the dog, but I'm not convinced that training like that builds sustainable skills like we need them to be built. So what I would rather see is take Cannoli, for example. I have summit goals with her. We're kind of in a rebuild phase right now. We've been focusing really hard on Mondio because she's going for her MR2 in October.
Good luck.
So thank you. We're in this moment where I'm kind of toggling back a little bit on the sexy, cool stuff and really thinking about laying another layer in her foundation, because even though summit stuff is big and elaborate and complex, if she has solid foundations, all of that stuff should be workable for her, or at least readable for me. And a lot of the summit hides, the more advanced you get, some of those hides are not finishable. You as a handler are kind of left to either make a call based on the information that the dog is giving or leave it behind. And both of those decisions are good in different respects, depending on how your day's going. But, this is another reason I'm kind of less and less interested in a final alert process, because as you get up in the levels, it's not that direct anymore. It's much bigger, much more complex. But taking her and deciding that I need to do foundational stuff, I know we need work in exteriors, but she struggles in exteriors. So me just throwing exterior hides out isn't going to make her skills better, because she already has this weird emotional response to the way that odor works like that. I don't know. I have yet to put my finger on it, but when I do, I'll let you know. But why don't I take my box game to the park and just play in boxes for a couple of days? Like, just do that. No pressure, just fun, lots more play than work, that kind of stuff. That's going to help her feel better about whatever she has decided is hard for her in that situation. that's going to help make her feel better. And I can capitalize on her feeling confident and good. And then I can slowly make that game a little bit more complicated, or I can slowly start introducing elevation, or I can slowly start introducing the idea that there might be a barrier involved or something like that. I don't know that we're doing, myself included, like I include myself in the we. I don't know that we're doing a great job at really breaking down the skills to preserve the attitude so that when we have a challenge in a test or wherever we happen to find it, the dog has the internal fortitude to persevere. And if we just keep throwing problems at the dogs, I'm not convinced that that makes learning happen.
So if you're thinking about it that way, and you're thinking about, this is a thing my dog struggles with, or this is a thing where there's room for growth, where we're not there yet.
Opportunity. There's
there are opportunities. I like that word. How are you evaluating those things? How do you evaluate where your dog's strong and where your dog has opportunities when it comes to sourcing odor, so that you can ultimately better evaluate what the dog already knows and what you still want them to learn?
Yeah. This is where I have changed, I think, in the last, maybe even certainly 2 years, but maybe even in the last 8 months. I am much better about reading when the dog hits that little confidence dip in whatever I've put out for her, and not paving over it, but observing it and taking care of it and really thinking about, well, why did that hit her confidence? And is it something that I need to address right now? Is it something that I can jot down in my training log, that I know you all keep, that I can go back to and reflect on? Is it something that I can, make even a mental note of and kind of observe over time? I'm more and more willing to see what I would have previously called as distraction behaviors as displacement behaviors, because I think it helps me stay more compassionate to the dog and what they're experiencing in that moment from what I put out. It helps me not get frustrated if they're, not on task or not doing what I want them to do, because I'm just assuming that distraction, whatever it is coming from an emotional place and not a deliberate, I'm not going to play your game today place. Because I think they do want to play the game. I think that it's a fun game for them to play as long as we present it in a fun way. But when I'm watching any dog, those are the things that I'm looking for. When they're searching, or it doesn't even have to be searching. It's just when they're out in the environment and the dog finds like the one blade of grass that is the most fascinating blade of grass that anybody has ever seen. That happens in Nosework, and often it happens after the search has gone on for a minute. And when that sort of thing happens, that blade of grass is not that interesting. There's something else that's happening there. And that blade of grass has now turned into a safe place for that dog. And if I hear them like whispers, I think Helene Lawler calls it whispers and shouts. I love that term, because it's so true. They're so subtle and they're so quiet. And certainly there are things that are louder. But if we can pay attention to the tiny things, we can make better decisions. Maybe I put the search away. Like maybe it's not worth having the argument with the dog in that moment and compelling the dog to do the thing that I want them to do. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel right to me. Maybe the dog needs a little bit of a brain break. Maybe I've done 3 reps of whatever I'm planning on doing and the dog did great, and it's the curse of just one more, and now I have a problem. Maybe the dog just needs a free sniff, like a legitimate free sniff away from work for a minute, and then I can come back and it's brilliant. Or like there's so many options of things that we can do. I think the thing that we just have to not do is push, because that doesn't set us up for cooperation, and this needs to be a cooperative game. We can't play it without the dog's buy-in, and it's up to us to kind of build that up. I took a tangent there, but
That's all right.
Back to strengths and weaknesses. Those are the things that I'm looking for. And then I try to keep track of what kind of hides make the dogs really happy, and I make sure to balance that with the kind of hides that are maybe troublesome for the dog in whatever way. And then aids. Use aids. Why are we so reluctant to use help? You know, your boxes are a help. Your pairing is a help. Your leash work is a help. Visible tins are a help. So many options for us to help the dog.
Can you maybe walk us through an example of, a more complex skill in nosework that you might kind of break down in this way into, more teachable pieces? Just so we can kind of get an idea of how you'd work through something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I had one in mind. So if we just take something that everybody always wants to work on, which is high hides, right? Everybody always wants to work on high hides. We see them in elite, I guess. For smaller dogs, they see them a lot more often. And I break down this skill. I talked about it in the webinar that I did recently, a few months back, I guess now. But I try to set up exercises not linearly, where we go from this, then this, then this, then this in a straight line, but more in a circle. So we kind of keep repeating similar exercises to build skills, because each one of the exercises that we would do to build a high hide skill tackles the skill from a different angle. So some of those exercises for me are, I want a good, solid horizontal maze work, right? Where the dog is navigating multiple barriers, working with wind. Maybe I set up a fan to push the odor one direction or another through the maze. The dog is working through that maze to make decisions. It builds pursuit. Pursuit I need for a high hide, because part of the complexity of a high hide, I think, is the dog trying to figure out how to explain what the odor is doing without being able to get to a final result. If the hide is 12 feet up, that dog cannot officially solve the problem. At the best, it's a guess, and it's usually a good guess, but it's if it has pursuit, it's going to give you oodles of information leading up to that guess, which might make you feel a little bit more confident if you know how to read the language of the dog. So I want pursuit with horizontal mazes. I flip those mazes on their head, and I do a lot of vertical maze work where I work on the dog climbing to reach source that's a little bit higher than what they could ordinarily reach from their floor level. I work on elevation in a way where I make sure that there's a cap to kind of force that odor down so that it's a solid form of an elevation, something that the dog can really grasp. But the number one thing I need to think about is, how am I going to build pursuit? And how am I looking at that pursuit in a way that I don't need the final alert behavior to understand where the odor is coming from? Suspension is certainly part of it. So I might play with a suspended hide. You can get a suspended hide even on the outside corner of a basic folding table, where it's away from the legs. You know, for small dogs, that's a suspended hide picture. And I can kind of watch how that dog is navigating that space and working towards solving the problem. But I'm tackling the high hide issue opportunity without drilling this high hide out of reach component with human expectations about what is correct.
Mm-hmm.
I take whatever the dog gives me, even if it's, if the hide is here and it's 3 feet off, I take it. That's a good answer for me. And then I go back to doing horizontal mazes because I need to recover the sourcing and the out of reach kind of component. So it's pulling apart, and then each dog is different too. Each dog has different strengths and different weaknesses, and we need to decipher where is the misunderstanding, and with something like the high hide component, a lot of times I think the misunderstanding is the dog doesn't know how to communicate without being able to source it.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot
But
of
all
sense.
of these things go around and around and around. So I do multiple horizontal mazes, filtered in with vertical mazes, filtered in with out of reach stuff, filtered in with everything that I can think of that will allow the dog to have a robust experience of that challenge.
So part of the reason we're talking about all of this is because you're teaching a new webinar for us on August 20th called Understanding Your Dog's Story of Odor. And then you're offering a class in September, Designing Learning in Nosework, Think, Observe, Adapt. So talk to me a little bit more about each of those. What kind of are we looking at in each of them? And then, kind of who might want to sign up?
Yeah, the dog story of odor, in my opinion, if you are at all geeky about the sport of nosework, we're going to talk about a little bit about odor theory, but mostly about the dog's experience through that odor picture. Mm-hmm. I am hoping it's coming together to be very entertainment forward. So I'm hoping that you will enjoy the hour that you spend with me during that webinar, as well as learning some stuff. If you follow me on social media, Instagram and Facebook, I've been doing a series called Call the Hide, where I present a clip of a dog working a problem, and I stop it before the final alert and ask people to decide where the hide actually is. And then I post the reveal in a couple days. And
interesting.
This dog story of odor is like that on steroids. It's a whole hour of that kind of experience, paired with the idea of what does that mean for me as the handler? How do I make handling choices or handling decisions based on what I'm hearing my dog say? Because that's where the skill lies. First we need to understand the dog. But after we understand the dog and we have a good feel of what the dog is communicating and we're open to that communication, then we've got to decide how to move in response to it, and when to put pressure and when to not put pressure, and when to stay and when to go, and when to call finish and when to think there's 3 more. And when, there's so many choices that we as handlers have to make in those moments. But if those choices are more led by the dog and less led by our own preconceived notions about what should or should not be happening in a space, then that's the magic. Mm-hmm. That's the magic in the sport. And then the class, Think, Observe, Adapt, is how I train everything. With my own dogs, I train this way in classes. I train this way in lessons. I have a whole seminar built around it. It's thinking about what I want the dog's experience to be, or what I would love the dog to get out of that experience, setting something based on those thoughts, trying not to lump those thoughts, trying to isolate it as much as I can, and maybe sneaking something else in there, but trying to isolate it as much as I can. Then I observe what was the dog's organic experience in that moment. And then I think about ways that I could adapt my exercise or adapt my hide placement to better meet my goal. Mm-hmm. And that's going through that series, I think, is a really valuable way to train almost everything. I mean, being good at observing and then adapting to that observation. I train the same way when I'm teaching my obedience stuff as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Michele. This has been excellent.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. And thanks to all of our listeners and our viewers for tuning in. We'll be back next week, this time with Lori Houston to talk about teaching the different crosses for agility. If you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast, either on iTunes, the podcast app of your choice, or over on YouTube to be sure you never miss an episode. Today's show is brought to you by the Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. Special thanks to Denise Fenzi for supporting this podcast. Music provided royalty-free by bensound.com. The track featured here is called Buddy. Audio and video editing provided by Chris Lang. Thanks again for tuning in, and happy training.